My parents were sick of my sister, so they removed part of her brain. My parents believed that children's problems were a waste of time. So when my sister got depressed, they paid a doctor to drill into her skull and scramble her brain so she'd finally stop crying all the time. Growing up, I always knew they found our problems annoying. When I broke my arm falling off my bike, they told me to stop being dramatic and wrap it myself. When my little brother's tonsils swelled up to the size of golf balls, they said he was doing it for attention. But what they did to my sister Claire was unforgivable. Claire started showing signs of depression when she was 14. She'd stay in bed all day. She stopped eating. She cried constantly. Normal parents would get their kid therapy or medication. My parents told her she was ruining the household atmosphere and to snap out of it. "You have nothing to be sad about," Mom would say while Claire sobbed at the dinner table. "This is a choice you're making." Dad would turn the TV volume up to drown out her crying. They acted like depression was something she was doing to personally inconvenience them. When Claire tried to tell them she needed help, Mom laughed in her face. Help with what? Being a teenager? We all went through it without making such a production. Claire begged them to take her to therapy. Dad said therapists were scam artists who created problems that didn't exist. "You want to talk about your feelings? Write in a diary like a normal girl?" But Claire was drowning and they were standing on the shore complaining about how loud she was being while she went under. Things got worse when Claire stopped going to school. The truancy officers started calling. My parents were furious, but not because they were worried about Claire. They were mad about the inconvenience. "Now we have to deal with the school board because you can't get out of bed?" Mom screamed at her. That's when they started researching permanent solutions. I found the pamphlets in Dad's office. Wilderness camps, military schools, and then at the bottom of the pile was a brochure for something called therapeutic psychosurgery. The word lobotomy was in small print at the bottom. I tried to warn Claire, but she didn't believe me. "They wouldn't," she said. But she didn't know them like I did. They absolutely would. 2 weeks later, they told Claire they were taking her to see a specialist who could fix her permanently. "One simple procedure and you'll never feel sad again," Mom said with this sick smile. Claire thought they meant antidepressants. She actually looked hopeful. She got in the car willingly. They brought her back 3 days later and she was different. Not better. Different. The crying had stopped, but so had everything else. She sat at the dinner table and stared at nothing. She answered questions in this flat voice like she was reading from a script. When I asked her what happened, she touched the bandages on her temples and said, "They fixed me. I don't feel sad anymore." She didn't feel anything anymore. They'd paid some doctor to perform an ice pick lobotomy like it was 1952. He scrambled the part of her brain that felt inconvenient emotions. Living with lobotomized Claire was like living with a ghost. She'd sit in her room for hours doing nothing, not reading or watching TV, just sitting. She smiled when you told her to smile. She ate when you put food in front of her. She was the perfect daughter my parents had always wanted. Quiet, compliant, no problems. "See how peaceful our home is now?" Mom said one night at dinner while Claire stared at her mashed potatoes. "We should have done this years ago." I started recording everything. Videos of Claire's empty stare, photos of her surgical scars, documents from the doctor who did this to her. I was 17 and planning to report them the day I turned 18. But then my little brother started falling apart from the stress of seeing Claire vanish before his eyes. He was having panic attacks and nightmares and crying all the time about how he wanted his sister back. Mom found him hyperventilating in the bathroom. "Not another one," she said to Dad that night when she thought we couldn't hear. "I can't go through this again." The next day, I heard them on the phone with the same doctor who lobotomized Claire. "Yes, we have another child who needs help," Mom was saying. "Similar issues, lots of unnecessary emotions." They were going to do it again. They were going to destroy my brother's brain just like they destroyed Claire's because his anxiety was inconvenient for them. I confronted them that night. "You can't do this to him," I said. "What you did to Claire was criminal." Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "We're the parents. We decide what's best." Mom smiled that same sick smile. "Actually, we've been noticing you seem awfully worked up lately. All this anger and hysteria. Maybe you need the same help Claire got." She pulled out a brochure from her purse. It had my name already written on the intake form. "Your appointment is next Tuesday." That night, I couldn't sleep. The appointment card sat on my desk where Mom left it. White paper with Tuesday 2 p.m. circled 3 times in red marker. My hands kept shaking every time I looked at it. 6 days. I had 6 days to figure out how to stop them from doing to me what they did to Claire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her empty face staring at nothing. I kept calculating the hours. Tuesday was 144 hours away. Then 143. Then 142. The numbers wouldn't stop running through my head. At 3 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and pulled out my laptop. I grabbed everything I'd been collecting about Claire over the past year. Photos of the scars on her temples, the surgical consent forms I'd found in Dad's filing cabinet with signatures that didn't match Mom's handwriting. Videos on my phone of Claire's flat voice answering questions. I uploaded it all to a cloud storage account I'd set up using a fake email address. Mom and Dad didn't know about this account. They thought they controlled all my passwords, but I'd been preparing for something like this. The upload bar crawled across the screen while I chewed my nails down to nothing. After everything finished uploading, I copied it all onto a USB drive. I needed a backup somewhere they'd never look. My tampon box. Dad wouldn't touch it if the house was on fire, and Mom never went through my bathroom stuff. I wrapped the USB in a plastic bag and buried it under the tampons at the bottom of the box. My brother's door was closed when I walked past his room, but I could hear him crying. I knocked quietly and slipped inside. He was curled up under his blankets, shaking. His face was red and wet, and he grabbed my hand the second I sat on his bed. He asked me in this tiny voice if they were going to make him stop feeling things too. My chest hurt so bad I could barely breathe. I promised him I wouldn't let that happen. I promised even though I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. He held onto my hand until he fell asleep, and I stayed there watching him breathe. At breakfast, Mom asked what time we were leaving Tuesday. I kept my voice normal and casual like we were discussing a dentist appointment. She gave me this smile that made my skin crawl. She said early enough that I wouldn't have time to get nervous. Dad turned the TV volume up louder. Sports highlights blared through the kitchen. This was normal family conversation to them, planning to scramble my brain over cereal. After school that day, I went straight to my room and pulled out my old phone. It didn't have service anymore, but it still worked on Wi-Fi. I'd kept it charged and hidden in my desk drawer. Now I needed somewhere better. The heating vent in my room had a loose grate. I unscrewed it and found a flat space inside where I could wedge the phone. I wrapped it in a sock to protect it and pushed it back as far as I could reach. Then I took the $40 in cash I'd been saving from birthday money and stuffed it in there too. If they tried to force me into that car on Tuesday, I needed a way to call for help. At lunch the next day, I texted Jessica our coded message. "Can you check on my fish Tuesday afternoon?" We'd set this up months ago after I first found out what they did to Claire. If she didn't hear from me by 3 p.m. on Tuesday, something was wrong. She texted back a thumbs up emoji. Seeing that tiny symbol made me feel slightly less alone. After school, I went to Claire's room. She was sitting on her bed staring at the wall like always. I pulled out my phone and showed her old photos of us from before. Pictures of us laughing at the beach, making faces in the mirror, hugging on Christmas morning. She looked at each photo for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "We appear happy in these images." Her voice was completely flat, like she was reading words off a card. I had to leave before I started crying. The school library was empty when I went there during free period. I pulled up the clinic address from the appointment card Mom gave me. The website looked professional with stock photos of smiling people and words like holistic and wellness. But when I searched the business license, it was only issued 8 months ago. The address listed was just a P.O. box. No actual building. No street number. I took screenshots of everything. I found a voice-changing app and called the clinic number from a library computer. I made my voice sound older and asked about services for my difficult teenager. The receptionist sounded way too cheerful. She described their permanent emotion regulation procedure like she was booking a spa day. She said 1 simple treatment and your child will be calm and compliant. She used those exact words. Calm and compliant. I recorded the whole call. When I got home that afternoon, Mom was waiting in the living room with my regular phone in her hands. She'd taken it from my backpack. She was scrolling through my messages and photos like she had every right. She announced new rules without even looking up at me. No phone. No computer except for homework at the kitchen table where she could watch. No leaving the house except for school. She would drop me off and pick me up personally every single day until Tuesday. Dad nodded from his chair like this was all perfectly reasonable. I went to my room and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. The appointment card was still on my desk. Tuesday, 2 p.m. in red marker. 4 days left now. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning, I walked into school and went straight to the counselor's office instead of my first class. My legs felt weird and shaky like they might give out. I grabbed the clipboard from the desk and tried to write my name on the appointment sheet, but my hands were shaking so bad the pen kept slipping. The secretary looked at me funny, but she buzzed Garrison's office and told me to wait. I sat in one of those plastic chairs in the waiting area and stared at the motivational posters on the wall about believing in yourself and reaching for the stars. None of that stuff mattered when your parents were planning to drill into your brain. Garrison opened her door and smiled at me, but it faded fast when she saw my face. She waved me in and I practically ran into her office before anyone could see me crying. The second she closed the door, everything came pouring out. I told her about Claire and the lobotomy and how she used to be normal and now she just sits and stares. I told her about my brother having panic attacks and how I heard Mom on the phone scheduling an appointment for him too. I pulled out the appointment card with my name on it and showed her the Tuesday date, and she took it from my shaking hands and read it 3 times. Her face went from concerned to pale to something that looked like anger, but controlled. She didn't interrupt me once, just kept nodding and writing notes on a yellow pad. When I finally stopped talking because I ran out of words, she put down her pen and looked at me really serious. She picked up her desk phone right there while I was still sitting across from her and dialed a number she had written on a sticky note. She said she needed to report imminent harm to a minor and possible previous victim in the home. She used words like non-consensual medical procedure and permanent neurological damage, and I realized this was actually happening now. Someone official was finally hearing what my parents did. She gave them my name and address and Claire's name and said yes, she would stay on the line. The person on the other end must have asked her to verify something because she repeated that a parent had already subjected one child to unauthorized psychosurgery and was planning the same for 2 more children. She kept saying things like time-sensitive and immediate intervention needed. After she hung up, she pulled her chair closer to mine and we spent the next hour going through every detail I could remember. She had me write down the exact date Claire came back different. She had me write down the doctor's name from the paperwork I photographed. She made me describe Claire's symptoms before and after in specific terms. She kept saying documentation is everything, and we need to be precise and factual. No emotions, just facts. I wrote until my hand cramped, and she made copies of everything, including photos of Claire's scars on my phone. She printed them out on her office printer and put them in a folder with my name on it. She told me she was mandated to report this, and she already did, but I needed to keep myself safe until CPS could investigate properly. She made me promise to text her every morning before school, and if I didn't, she would call the police for a welfare check. I promised and meant it. That afternoon, I was sitting in English class when the office called my teacher and said I had a phone call. My stomach dropped because nobody calls students during class unless it's an emergency. I went to the office and the secretary handed me the phone, and it was Mom. Her voice was that scary, calm quiet that meant she was furious. She said the school counselor called her about our private family business and asked if I had anything to say for myself. I didn't answer, and she said I was grounded indefinitely starting right now. She said she already submitted paperwork to withdraw me from the school, and I would be homeschooled starting tomorrow, so I couldn't spread lies to strangers anymore. She told me to get my things and wait in the parking lot because she was coming to pick me up early. I hung up and grabbed my backpack and saw Garrison watching from her office doorway. She mouthed, "Be safe," and I nodded, but I felt sick. When I got home, Mom didn't even look at me, just pointed at my room. Dad came home early from work, and they had a loud conversation in the kitchen about how I was trying to destroy the family. That night after dinner, when they thought I was asleep, my brother snuck into my room. He looked terrified and asked if they were really going to homeschool me. I told him yes, but we needed a plan. We decided on a code word that meant call 911 immediately. If either of us said the word emergency out loud, the other one had to call for help no matter what. He made me promise I wouldn't let them take him to that doctor, and I promised, even though I was scared, I couldn't actually stop them. He hugged me really tight and snuck back to his room before they noticed he was gone. I waited until after midnight when I could hear Dad snoring through their bedroom door. I grabbed the small voice recorder I bought last year for a school project and tiptoed down the hall. Their door was open a crack and I could see them both asleep. I got down on my hands and knees and crawled to the side of their bed, moving. So slowly it took forever. I reached under the bed frame and wedged the recorder between the mattress support and the wall where they would never look. My heart was beating so hard I thought they would hear it, but neither of them moved. I crawled back out and made it to my room without making a sound. The next morning, I woke up to my hidden phone buzzing in the heating vent. I pulled it out and saw an unknown number. A man's voice said his name was Woodward from CPS, and he was calling about the report filed yesterday. He asked me to verify the details Garrison gave them, and I went through everything again. He said they were opening a formal investigation, but home visits take time to schedule properly. He needed me to stay safe and keep documenting everything until they could intervene. He gave me his direct number and said to call immediately if my parents tried to take me anywhere. I wrote his number on my arm in pen under my sleeve where Mom wouldn't see it. At lunch, I went to the library instead of the cafeteria and logged into one of the public computers. I searched the doctor's name from the appointment card and found his practice website. It looked normal and professional with stock photos of happy families. But when I searched his name plus medical board complaint, I found a PDF from 5 years ago. Someone filed a complaint against a doctor with almost the same name but one letter different. The complaint said experimental procedures without proper licensing and potential harm to patients. The case was marked as under investigation, but I couldn't find any resolution. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. That afternoon, Garrison called me into her office again and said she wanted to connect me with someone who could help. She had a woman on speakerphone named Holden, who said she was a legal aid attorney who works with minors in crisis situations. Holden asked me some questions about the appointment and whether my parents had legal guardianship. She explained that I had rights even as a minor, and there were legal options to stop medical procedures I didn't consent to. She said she would start preparing paperwork for an emergency protective order, but I needed to keep gathering evidence. She told me to document everything my parents said and did. She gave me her direct number and said to call anytime, day or night, if the situation escalated. When I got home, Mom was waiting with new rules written on a piece of paper taped to the refrigerator. No phone, no computer, no leaving my room except for meals and bathroom. She had already called the school and confirmed my withdrawal. I went to my room and stared at the appointment card still sitting on my desk. Tuesday kept getting closer. That afternoon, I waited until I heard Dad leave for work and Mom start the vacuum downstairs. I crept into their bedroom and dropped to my knees beside their bed. The recorder was still wedged exactly where I left it between the mattress support and the wall. My fingers were slippery with sweat as I pulled it out and hit stop. I had to listen right there to make sure it actually recorded something. I plugged in my earbuds and pressed play. Static at first, then Dad's voice saying something about dinner, then Mom responding about needing to call the clinic. My thumb hovered over the fast-forward button. Then I heard it. Mom's voice, clear as anything, saying we should move her appointment to Friday instead and get it done before anyone interferes. I almost dropped the recorder. Friday was 3 days away, not 6. They were speeding everything up. I shoved the recorder in my pocket and got out of there before my legs gave out completely. Back in my room, I plugged the recorder into my laptop using the old cable I kept hidden in my desk drawer. The file took forever to upload to my cloud account because our internet was slow, and I kept checking the door every few seconds. Finally, it finished. I opened my email and typed Miss Garrison's address, then Ms. Holden's address from the card she gave me. I attached the link and started typing an explanation, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to delete it and start over. The second attempt wasn't much better, but at least it was readable. I wrote that my parents moved up the appointment to Friday and they said it right there in the recording. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Miss Holden called back in less than an hour. She said we needed to file for an emergency protective order right away. She walked me through what the court would need to see, what kind of information made cases move faster, how quickly we could potentially get in front of a judge. She used words like imminent harm and irreparable damage, and I realized she understood exactly how serious this was. She told me to write down every single fact I could remember with dates and times and names. She said to keep my phone on me at all times. After we hung up, I pulled out Claire's discharge papers from the folder under my mattress. I needed her actual medical records to prove what they did to her. The hospital name was printed at the top with a phone number underneath. I dialed it on my hidden phone. The number rang twice, and then a recorded message said the number was disconnected. I tried again thinking I misdialed. Same message. I went online and searched the hospital name. It existed. It was real. But when I called their main line and asked for records, they transferred me 3 times before someone finally told me they had no patient by that name in their system. No record of Claire ever being there. No record of any procedure. Nothing. They erased her completely. That night, after everyone went to bed, I searched online for anything about lobotomy patients. I found a forum buried deep in the search results where people posted about family members who had procedures done. Most of the posts were old, from years ago, but I scrolled through them anyway looking for anything familiar. Then I found one from 8 months ago. A parent describing their daughter's flat affect after a procedure. How she just sat and stared. How she did whatever you told her to do. Another post from 6 months ago describing almost the exact same thing. A third post from 4 months ago. All 3 mentioned the same outcome Claire had. One of the parents mentioned the clinic name in their post. It was the same name printed on my appointment card. The same place Mom was planning to take me on Friday. I took screenshots of everything and uploaded them to my cloud account. The next morning, I woke up to Mom standing in my doorway watching me. She said she was getting something from her closet and walked past my bed. I waited until I heard her go downstairs before I got up. When I went to use the bathroom, I passed their bedroom and saw their closet door was open. On the top shelf sat a small safe I had never seen before. I checked the hallway, then went in and took 3 photos of it with my hidden phone. The brand name was visible on the front. I took a photo of that too. Then I heard Mom coming back up the stairs and I ducked into the bathroom and shut the door. My heart was beating. So hard I thought she would hear it through the wall. Later that morning, Ms. Garrison called my hidden phone and said she filed a supplemental CPS report. She attached typed excerpts from the audio recording where my parents discussed moving up my appointment. She said this strengthened the case a lot because it showed they were actively planning to go through with it and trying to do it faster to avoid interference. She sounded more worried than before. She told me to stay in public places as much as possible and not to go anywhere alone with my parents. That afternoon, the house phone rang and I heard Mom answer it in the kitchen. I grabbed my hidden phone and started recording. The voice on the other end was female and professional sounding. She said she was calling to confirm Friday's appointment for the daughter. Mom's voice got all cheerful and fake. She confirmed the time and asked about payment arrangements. The receptionist said they preferred cash but could take credit card with a processing fee. Mom said cash was fine and asked if they needed to arrive early for paperwork. The receptionist said no. Everything was already filled out. They just needed to bring me and sign the final consent forms there. I recorded the whole thing. When Mom hung up, I stopped recording and immediately uploaded the file to my cloud. That evening, Miss Holden emailed me a template declaration form for emergency court orders. She said to fill in every specific fact I knew, including dates, names, evidence locations, and Claire's current condition. I sat at my desk and started writing. Claire's procedure date, the doctor's name from the appointment card, the clinic address, the recordings I had, the photos of Claire's scars, the forum posts, the disconnected hospital line, my appointment date and time. Writing it all down made it feel more real than it had before, like I was building something solid out of all these scattered pieces of proof. My hand cramped from writing so much, but I kept going until I had filled out every single line on the form. Thursday morning, Mom announced at breakfast that we were taking a family trip this weekend. She said to pack bags for a few days. Dad nodded and kept eating his eggs. Claire stared at her plate. My brother looked at me with wide, scared eyes. Mom said it would be good for all of us to get away for a while. After breakfast, while Mom was in the shower, I went into her bedroom. Her suitcase was already sitting on the bed half-packed. I looked inside and saw regular clothes, toiletries, and then underneath everything else I found medical gauze still in the package. Bandages. 3 prescription bottles with labels that had someone else's name on them. I took photos of everything. I Googled the medication names on my phone. They were specifically prescribed for post-surgical brain swelling and infection prevention. Exactly what someone would need after having holes drilled in their skull. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single item in that suitcase. The gauze packages, the bandages still in their wrappers, each prescription bottle with someone else's name scratched off the label. My hands shook while I typed the medication names into Google. The first result made my stomach drop. Dexamethasone for reducing brain swelling after neurosurgery. The second medication was an antibiotic specifically prescribed to prevent infection in surgical wounds. The third was for managing post-operative pain in neurological procedures. I took screenshots of every search result and uploaded them to my cloud account. This was exactly what someone would need after having holes drilled in their skull. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered it quickly and heard Woodward's voice saying he had scheduled an unannounced home visit for this evening around 6. Relief flooded through me until I heard the house phone ring downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened to Mom answer it. Her voice completely changed. She went from her normal sharp tone to this sugary, sweet, fake voice that made my skin crawl. She thanked Woodward for his concern and said of course they would cooperate fully with his visit. She laughed this horrible tinkling laugh and said they had nothing to hide and welcomed the chance to clear up any misunderstandings. She promised to have everyone home and available. The second she hung up, I heard her start barking orders at Dad. Mom spent the entire afternoon in a cleaning frenzy. She vacuumed carpets that were already clean. She scrubbed counters until they gleamed. She arranged fresh flowers in vases and lit scented candles in every room. Then she gathered me, Claire, and my brother in the living room. She told Claire to smile more and look happy. She made Claire practice saying she felt great and loved her family. Claire repeated the words in that flat robot voice while Mom got increasingly frustrated. Then Mom turned to my brother and her voice went ice cold. She told him if he cried or looked upset during the visit, she would give him something real to cry about later. My brother's face went white and he nodded silently. Mom made us rehearse answers to potential questions. She told us exactly what to say about our family life, our relationships, our emotional states. She said if anyone contradicted her version of events, there would be serious consequences. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mom smoothed her hair and pasted on a bright smile before opening the door. Woodward stood there with a clipboard and a kind but serious expression. Mom welcomed him in with that fake cheerful voice. She offered him coffee and cookies like this was a social visit. While Mom went to the kitchen, I positioned myself near Woodward. When he extended his hand for a handshake, I pressed the USB drive into his palm. His fingers closed around it smoothly without any change in his expression. I mouthed the words, "Private interview, please," and he gave me the tiniest nod. Mom came back with coffee, and Woodward asked if he could speak with Claire privately. Mom's smile tightened, but she agreed. I stood in the hallway where I could see through the doorway into the dining room. Woodward pulled out a chair for Claire and sat across from her. He asked her gentle questions about school and her daily routine. Claire answered in that horrible flat monotone that made her sound like a recording. He asked about her interests and hobbies. She said she did not have any interests. He asked if she felt sad or worried about anything. She said she did not feel sad or worried because they fixed that. Then Woodward asked about the scars on her temples. Claire reached up and touched them without any emotion showing on her face. She said the doctor fixed her brain, so she would not be sad anymore. She said it like she was describing a dental cleaning. Woodward wrote notes on his clipboard and I could see his jaw tighten. When he finished with Claire, he spoke briefly with my brother, who managed not to cry even though I could see him trembling. Then Woodward asked to speak with my parents. I stayed in the hallway and listened. Woodward told them that performing non-consensual medical procedures on minors was illegal, and he would be monitoring the situation very closely. He said he had concerns about Claire's condition, and would be following up with additional visits. Mom thanked him for his concern with that smile that did not reach her eyes at all. She said they only wanted what was best for their children, and any medical decisions were made with proper consultation and consent. Dad nodded along and said they were a loving family who would never do anything to harm their kids. Woodward left and I watched through the window as his car pulled away. The second his taillights disappeared, Dad's face changed. He stormed upstairs and I heard the sound of a drill. He removed the door from my bedroom completely. Then he went into my brother's room and did the same thing. He carried both doors down to the garage and said since we could not be trusted, we did not deserve privacy anymore. I stood in my doorway looking at the empty frame and felt shame burn through me. Everyone walking by could see into my room now. I could not change clothes or cry or do anything without being watched. My brother looked at me from his doorless room with tears running down his face. Friday morning, my phone buzzed with an email from Holden. She had filed an emergency motion first thing requesting a temporary protective order to block any medical procedures. She sent me the case number and told me to memorize it. I grabbed a pen and wrote the numbers on my arm in blue ink. I traced over them 3 times to make sure they would not smudge off. This was my proof that someone official was trying to help. During my lunch period, I used the school library computer to search property records for the clinic address. I found the listing and my stomach dropped. The clinic was not in a medical building at all. It was a rented suite in a strip mall between a nail salon and something called Crystal Wellness Spa. The photos showed a shabby storefront with tinted windows and a small sign. This did not look anything like a legitimate medical facility. I took screenshots and emailed them to both Holden and Garrison. My phone buzzed with a text from Garrison. She said she was setting up a safety protocol for me. I had to text her a specific emoji every single day by noon. She sent me a purple heart emoji to use. If she did not receive it by noon, she was instructed to immediately call the police for a welfare check. She said this was non-negotiable, and I had to do it every day without fail. I saved her number under a fake name and set a daily alarm for 11:30. Friday afternoon, I got home from the school and found Mom waiting in the living room with papers spread across the coffee table. She looked up at me with this satisfied expression and announced I would not be going back to the school until after my treatment was finished. I felt my chest get tight as she explained she had already submitted the withdrawal paperwork that morning, and the school had accepted it. She said it was better this way because I would not have to worry about missing classes while I recovered from the procedure. The walls of the house seemed to press in closer, and I realized she was cutting off my access to Garrison and any other adults who might help. I nodded and went upstairs to my doorless room where anyone walking by could see everything I did. I pulled out my hidden phone from inside the heating vent, and my hands shook as I typed out a quick message to Garrison explaining Mom had withdrawn me from the school, and the timeline was moving faster than we thought. I hit send and watched the message go through just as I heard Mom's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in my doorway and her eyes went straight to the phone in my hands. She crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed it from me before I could react. I watched her scroll through my recent messages, and her face went red when she saw Garrison's name. She did not yell or lecture me. She just turned and walked downstairs with my phone, and I heard her immediately making calls to both Holden and Woodward. I knew Garrison would see my message and alert everyone that things were accelerating. That night, I could not sleep, so I logged into the cloud account from my brother's tablet while he was asleep. I went through old files I had backed up months ago and found a voicemail from 2 years back that the doctor had left for my parents about scheduling Claire's procedure. I played it through my earbuds and something about his voice sounded wrong. The cadence was right, but the tone seemed different from the voicemail he had left more recently about my appointment. I downloaded the audio file and ran it through a search engine that could identify voices from online content. After 20 minutes of searching, I found a video from a medical conference 3 years ago, where someone with the same voice was giving a presentation about alternative psychiatric treatments. The name on his conference badge was completely different from the name he used now. I took screenshots of everything and uploaded them to a new folder labeled with random numbers, so my parents would not find it if they checked. I sent the links to both Garrison and Holden through the cloud sharing system since I did not have my phone anymore. Saturday morning, I woke up to find Mom standing in my doorway holding my hidden phone that I thought was safely tucked in the heating vent. She must have searched my room after I fell asleep. She walked over to where I was sitting up in bed and held the phone up so I could see it clearly. Then she dropped it on the floor and stomped on it with her heel. The screen shattered into a spider web of cracks, and she stomped 3 more times until pieces of glass and plastic scattered across the floor. She asked if I had any other devices hidden anywhere, and I shook my head. She left without saying anything else, and I got up and swept the broken pieces into my trash can. I did not cry or show any reaction because I had already set up the backup plan with Jessica days ago. Jessica knew to call Garrison if I did not send her a check-in message by noon every day. I glanced at the clock and saw it was 10 in the morning. 2 more hours and the backup plan would kick in automatically. I sat on my bed and watched the minutes crawl by on my alarm clock. 11 o'clock passed. 11:30 came and went. At exactly noon, my doorway was empty, and I knew Jessica would be seeing that I had missed our check-in. I pictured her calling Garrison and explaining that something was wrong. 15 minutes later, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I went to the window and saw a police cruiser parked behind Dad's car. Officer Barton got out and walked up to the front door. I heard the doorbell ring and then Mom's fake sweet voice greeting him. She invited him in, and I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. Barton explained he was there for a welfare check because someone had expressed concerns about the children in the home. Mom laughed and said everything was fine and we were a normal, happy family. She called for Claire and my brother to come downstairs. Claire appeared from her room and walked down the steps with that blank expression. My brother came out of his room and I saw him wipe his eyes quickly before heading down. Barton asked to speak with each of us separately, and Mom agreed but stayed close by during every conversation. When Barton talked to my brother, I watched from the stairs and saw how my brother kept glancing at Dad nervously. Barton asked him a few questions about school and activities. When Dad shifted his weight and took a step forward, my brother actually flinched and Barton noticed. His eyes moved to the empty door frames of our bedrooms, and I saw him taking mental notes. He asked Mom why the bedroom doors were removed, and she gave some excuse about improving air circulation in the house. Barton did not look convinced, but he thanked everyone for their time and said he would be filing a report about his visit. After Barton left the house, phone rang and Mom answered it. I heard her say Woodward's name and I moved closer to the top of the stairs. Woodward was asking them to hold off on any medical procedures until the court hearing that was scheduled. Dad grabbed the phone from Mom and started arguing about parental rights and how they had every legal authority to make medical decisions for their children. His voice got louder as he talked about government overreach and bureaucrats interfering with families. Mom stood next to him and I could see her face from where I was crouched on the stairs. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working, and her hands were balled into fists at her sides. When Dad finally hung up, he looked at Mom and they had one of those silent conversations that married people have. Neither of them said anything, but I knew they were planning something. Late Saturday night, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard footsteps in the hallway. My parents stopped right outside my doorless room and started whispering. I stayed completely still and kept my breathing slow and even like I was asleep. Mom's voice was barely audible, but I heard her say they needed to leave at dawn Sunday morning. Dad whispered back, asking if she had confirmed the appointment at the other location. Mom said yes, and that they would get this done before the courts could interfere any further. She said the clinic had a satellite office across the state line, and they could be there by noon Sunday if they left early enough. Dad agreed and said they should pack the car tonight so they could just load us in and go first thing in the morning. I heard them walk away toward their bedroom, and I waited 5 minutes before moving. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought they might hear it through the walls. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hall to my brother's room. He was curled up under his blankets, but his eyes were open. I put my finger to my lips and gestured for him to stay quiet. I grabbed his sneakers from beside his bed and tucked them under my arm. He looked confused but did not say anything. I crept back to my room and shoved his shoes deep in my closet behind a pile of old clothes. Without shoes, he could not be forced into the car as easily. I remembered Jessica still had her phone and I needed to get a message to Garrison immediately. I snuck downstairs and found Jessica's number written on a scrap of paper in my school folder. I used the kitchen phone and texted from that number explaining the exact situation. I told Garrison my parents were planning to take us out of state at dawn Sunday. I included our car make and model and the license plate number. I added every detail I could think of, including the fact that they mentioned a satellite clinic location across state lines. I sent the message and deleted it from the phone's history. Then I went back upstairs and got into bed. I did not sleep at all that night. Around 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep and grabbed Jessica's phone from my hiding spot to check the clinic email one more time. The auto reply came back immediately with their standard message about appointment confirmations. But at the bottom, I noticed a line I had missed before about their satellite office location in the neighboring state. They had multiple facilities, which meant my parents could move us around to avoid local authorities if they needed to. I took screenshots of everything and uploaded them to the cloud account. At 5 a.m., my email notification buzzed, and I saw a message from Holden with the subject line urgent court order. She had worked through the entire night to get an emergency hearing with a judge, and the email explained she was requesting a temporary restraining order against any non-emergency medical procedures on me or my brother. She wrote that the order would be delivered electronically to my parents and local law enforcement within the hour. As I read the message 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Sunday morning arrived with footsteps pounding down the hallway toward my brother's room. I heard Dad's voice telling him to get up and get dressed because they were leaving right now. My brother started crying and saying he did not want to go. I jumped out of bed and ran to his doorway just as Dad grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward the stairs. I lunged forward and grabbed my brother's other arm and yanked him toward the bathroom. We both stumbled through the bathroom door and I slammed it shut and turned the lock. Dad immediately started pounding on the door and yelling for us to open it right now. The whole door shook with each hit and I could hear Mom's footsteps coming up the stairs. I picked up the bathroom phone with shaking hands and dialed 911 while my brother pressed his back against the door to hold it shut. The operator answered and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained that my parents were trying to take us for an unlawful medical procedure. I told her about the open CPS case and gave her Woodward's full name and contact information. I mentioned the pending restraining order that Holden had filed, and I spelled out Holden's name twice, so the operator could find her in the system. Dad was still pounding on the door and screaming about how we were being ridiculous and making everything worse for ourselves. The operator stayed on the line with me and said officers were on their way. She asked me to stay in the locked bathroom until police arrived. I could hear Mom outside the door now too, and she was using her scary calm voice telling us we had 10 seconds to open the door, or there would be serious consequences. My brother was crying quietly, and I put my arm around him while keeping the phone pressed to my ear. The operator asked if we were in immediate physical danger, and I said yes because my dad was trying to break down the door. She said officers were 3 minutes away. Those 3 minutes felt like hours while Dad kept hitting the door, and Mom kept counting down from 10 over and over. Finally, I heard the doorbell ring, and then heavy knocking downstairs. Officer Barton's voice came through the front door announcing police presence. Dad stopped pounding on the bathroom door, and I heard him stomp down the stairs. The operator told me to stay on the line until an officer came to get us. I heard voices downstairs getting louder, and Dad was yelling about parental rights and government overreach. Barton came upstairs a few minutes later and knocked gently on the bathroom door and identified himself. I unlocked the door and saw Barton standing there with another officer behind him. He told us we were safe now and asked us to come downstairs. In the living room, Dad was red in the face and shouting while Mom stood next to him with this blank, scary expression like she had completely shut down. Barton explained that Holden had emailed the temporary restraining order to both the police department and my parents about 20 minutes ago. He held up his phone showing the court order and read the relevant section out loud about no non-emergency medical procedures being performed on either minor child. Dad started yelling about how they were the parents and they had every legal right to make medical decisions for their children. Barton stayed calm and said the court had issued a valid order and they needed to comply. Woodward arrived about 10 minutes later and came straight to where my brother and I were sitting on the couch. He explained he was placing my brother in temporary protective custody effective immediately. I asked if I could go with him instead of staying in the house, and Woodward looked at Barton and then back at me and said he could make those arrangements right now. He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls to get authorization for emergency placement for both of us. My parents started screaming about how we were their children, and they had the right to make medical decisions and raise us how they saw fit. Mom's voice got higher and more frantic as she kept repeating that we were being dramatic and making a scene over nothing. Barton warned them that violating the restraining order would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Before we left, I grabbed Woodward's arm and begged him to get Claire evaluated too, because she was still here with them, and they had already destroyed her brain. Woodward pulled out his notepad and wrote down everything I said about Claire's current condition and the visible scars on her temples. He said they would pursue a full medical assessment for her as part of the investigation, and he would make sure it happened within the next few days. A woman from the shelter arrived in a county van, and Woodward walked us out to the vehicle while my parents stood in the doorway screaming. The shelter intake process took almost 2 hours with paperwork and medical checks and questions about our immediate needs. They separated me and my brother into different wings because the facility had gender-specific housing, but the intake coordinator explained we could have supervised phone calls twice a day at set times. Hearing that I could still talk to him helped, even though the idea of being separated made my chest feel tight. They gave us each a small room with a bed and a locker and some basic toiletries. My brother looked so small standing in the hallway holding his plastic bag of belongings. That afternoon, Holden called the shelter phone and asked to speak with me. She explained this was just the beginning of a very long process, involving a full investigation, multiple court hearings, and possible criminal charges against the doctor who performed Claire's procedure. She said nothing would be fast or simple, but the most important thing was that we were safe right now, and the restraining order was in place. I asked her how long we would have to stay in the shelter, and she said it depended on what the investigation found and what the court decided, but it would likely be several weeks at minimum. After we hung up, I sat on the thin mattress in my assigned room and looked at the blank walls and realized I had actually done it. We had gotten out. The next morning, Holden called the shelter phone with an update. She said the medical board sent her a confirmation email overnight that they opened a formal investigation into the doctor. They assigned a case number and an investigator named Knox who would be handling everything. She read me the case number twice so I could write it down, and I put it in my phone under a contact labeled important in case my parents somehow got access to my stuff. Holden said Knox had a good reputation for being thorough and not backing down from difficult cases. That afternoon, I sat in the shelter common room with the laptop they let me use for schoolwork and went through my cloud backup looking for anything else that might help. I found a screenshot I took months ago of a bank statement that showed up on the printer once. My parents paid $15,000 to something called Wellness Solutions LLC, which sounded fake and vague. I sent the screenshot to Holden and she called back an hour later saying she traced the LLC through state business records. The company was registered to the same doctor, but he used what looked like his original name before he changed it. She said this proved the payment went directly to him and not some legitimate medical facility. 3 days later, we had the preliminary hearing at the courthouse. A sheriff's deputy drove me there in the morning, and I sat in a waiting room until they called my case number. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed the emergency restraining order and asked both sides if they had anything to add. Mom's lawyer stood up and argued that my parents had the right to make medical decisions for their minor children, and that I was exaggerating normal teenage conflicts. The judge looked at the evidence packet Holden submitted and said the restraining order would continue. She formally ordered my parents to refrain from any non-emergency medical procedures on any of their children pending further investigation. Mom's lawyer tried to argue again, but the judge cut him off and said the order was clear. After the hearing, the judge called everyone back and said the court was appointing a guardian ad litem to represent my brother's interests. She said they were also discussing appointing one for me until I turned 18 in 3 months. Holden explained later that a guardian ad litem is someone whose only job is protecting the kid in court cases. Having an actual person assigned just to make sure we were okay felt weird and surreal, like this was happening to someone else. That same week, Woodward scheduled an interview with Claire. He brought a specialist who did cognitive assessments with brain injury patients. I wasn't allowed to be there, but Woodward called me afterward and said they documented everything. The specialist's report said the damage to Claire's brain was likely permanent. She recommended a full neurological assessment at a hospital, but said based on the initial evaluation, Claire would probably never fully recover her emotional range. Woodward's voice sounded tired when he told me this, like it made him sad too. He said they were building a case, but it would take time. 2 days after that, Holden warned me that my parents hired their own attorney. She said he was already building a defense that portrayed me as a dramatic teenager making up stories for attention. Their lawyer claimed I was angry about normal parental discipline and exaggerating everything to get my way. Holden said this was standard strategy, and I needed to stay completely factual in anything I said to anyone. She told me to avoid emotional language and stick to specific dates, times, and observable facts. The next time we met in person, Holden spent an hour coaching me on communication. She said I needed to avoid social media completely. No posts, no comments, no messages that could be screenshotted. She said anything I posted could be twisted and used against me in court. She told me to keep all communications minimal and fact-based. If someone asked me questions, I should say I couldn't discuss an ongoing investigation. She made me practice saying it until it sounded natural. Meanwhile, my brother started seeing a trauma counselor at the shelter. The counselor was a woman in her 30s who specialized in kids who witnessed violence. My brother met with her 3 times a week. After 2 weeks, the shelter staff told me he made it through a whole night without a panic attack. The counselor said he was responding well to treatment and learning coping strategies. When I talked to him on our supervised calls, he sounded different. Not happy exactly, but less scared. He told me about breathing exercises and how to recognize when his anxiety was starting. 5 weeks after we got to the shelter, Knox from the medical board requested an in-person interview with me. He came to the shelter on a Thursday afternoon and we sat in a conference room with Holden present. Knox was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and glasses. He asked detailed questions about everything I witnessed with Claire. He wanted to know exact dates, what the doctor looked like, what the clinic building looked like, everything. I gave him access to all my original files and recordings. He spent 20 minutes going through my phone looking at timestamps and metadata. When he was done, he said this was some of the most thorough documentation he had ever seen from a minor. He said most people his age didn't think to preserve evidence like I did. That night, I lay in my shelter bed thinking about how I turned 18 in 2 months. Holden was already preparing paperwork for me to legally separate from my parents. She said once I was an adult, I could petition the court for full independence, and they couldn't force me to come home. Having a specific date when I would have more control helped me get through each day. I counted down the weeks on the calendar they gave me. 60 days until I could make my own medical decisions. 60 days until they couldn't schedule appointments for me. 60 days until I had legal standing to fight for Claire and my brother, without needing an adult to speak for me. The next morning, I sat at a table in the shelter's computer room and started writing everything down for Knox and the prosecutors. I opened a blank document and typed the date Claire went for her procedure, then the date she came back different. I listed every change I noticed in her behavior, the exact location of her scars, the times I heard my parents discussing the doctor. I uploaded the photos in chronological order with captions explaining what each one showed. I added timestamps from my recordings and screenshots of the bank transfers my parents made. Holden reviewed it that afternoon and said prosecutors loved this kind of clear timeline because it showed a pattern they could prove in court. She made a few suggestions about adding more specific observations, and I spent another hour filling in details about Claire's flat voice and empty stare. 2 days later, the shelter arranged a supervised visit with my brother in their family meeting room. We sat across from each other at a small table while a staff member waited by the door. My brother looked better than the last time I saw him, less pale and jumpy. He told me his counselor was teaching him exercises for when he felt panicky, and that he slept through 3 whole nights this week. We talked about what happens when I turn 18 and whether we could live together somewhere. I reminded him that Claire was still our sister even if the procedure took away her ability to show feelings. He nodded and said he still loved her even though she couldn't love him back the same way anymore. Then he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and said he thought we were going to make it through this. Sitting there watching him look hopeful instead of terrified, I let myself believe for the first time that we might actually survive what our parents tried to do to us.